Welcome to Indianomics. Today we discuss a part of the recent judgment of the NCLAT, the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, in the Essar Steel case, which effectively obliterates the distinction between financial creditors and operational creditors. Also, it perhaps obliterates the distinction between secured creditors and unsecured financial creditors. Consequently, banks who have been taking large defaulters like Essar Steel to the bankruptcy court may now likely get much less from those who are buying the distressed companies, and therefore these banks may prefer to take the companies into liquidation rather than to the bankruptcy court. This may result in destruction of economic value. Under the current judgment of the NCLAT, a large share may go to operational creditors who, under the current understanding of the bankruptcy law, get only 10% of the sale value of the distressed asset. To check whether this is the way the law ought to be understood, and if yes, what may be the consequences, I'm joined by Shardul Shroff of Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, Bahram Vakil of AZB and Partners, VG Kannan, the CEO of Indian Banks Association, and Sunil Srivastava, former Deputy Managing Director of the State Bank of India, who was in charge of stressed assets. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Well, first, let me start with you, Shardul Shroff. Is my understanding of the judgment correct? Can you give me the key takeaways from the NCLAT judgment in the Essar Steel case?
I think to state that the distinction is obliterated may be excessive, but certainly what has happened is that NCLT has arrogated to itself the ability to rewrite these resolution plans submitted by a resolution applicant, to change the consent of the resolution applicant, to change the consent of the committee of creditors, and to substitute their judgment by its judgment. And that in some sense has disrupted the rights and obligations between secured creditors and unsecured creditors under the IBC. These are defined terms under the IBC, and to therefore effectively negate the advantage that a secured creditor has, the rights that he has, and equate the secured creditor in terms of the distribution as if they were entitled to only that much amount as would be paid to the unsecured creditor, is completely making a nonsense of the IBC.
Okay. Bahram, you were involved in the committee that recommended the clauses of the IBC, and of course you're even now in the law committee that is going to recommend changes to the law. What is your understanding? Does it go against the grain, the theme of the IBC, the NCLAT judgment?
Yes, Latha, I fear it does, and I am extremely worried about its import, and therefore if I could just have a short time, I'll go through it as quickly as I can. Section 30 clearly says that as long as the operational creditor gets a minimum of liquidation value, the COC can decide. Section 31 says, once again, that the COC, as approved by the creditors committee, subject to 30, which is, as I just said, that floor minimum liquidation plan, the NCLT shall, the word again used is shall. So as I totally understand that the architecture of the law, whether you may agree with it, not agree with it, the idea was most of the money was from the banks. That's the ground reality in India. And they have more, they are well versed with commercial and financial matters. And because of the speed at which we need things to move, these decisions, all commercial decisions, should be taken by COC. You want to rewrite the law, that's a whole different matter. But today, that was the decision. So as per 30 and 31, I think it's extremely clear. And very quickly, Latha, I would like to say that the import of this is, you want to take out the distinction between secured, unsecured, all of us start paying 15% on home loans. Instead of 9.25 with a normal mortgage on your home, the banks, what choice will they have? They must price everything as unsecured. So all corporates should start paying at 15. We should all start paying at 15. Two other points is that you are pushing towards liquidation. Because naturally, if this is the situation, you're going to push it towards liquidation. Even in the current case, I don't want to get too involved, it's sub judice, but you will push this towards liquidation. And the last point is, even in that ease of doing business ranking, where we have made so much headway, it clearly says protection of secured creditors is a clear point of contention. So you cannot, it's the most core basic principle of banking.
Okay. Mr. Shroff, do you want to come in on this before I go to the bankers? Do you think this situation is pretty dire and bankers and creditors will start preferring liquidation now if the NCLAT judgment is upheld in the Superior Court?
I think so. In fact, both Bahram and me have been moving around with the chairman of the IBBI and people from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and they've had road shows in New York, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and the overwhelming response that we've heard at these conferences that if this principle is unraveled and if they go ahead with giving priority, equal priority between the unsecured creditor and the secured creditor, the entire attempt of the government of India to bring in new funds from international sources will completely dry up. They don't have any hope in hell that an international distress fund would come in on these principles. Even in India, I think the fact, as Bahram has mentioned, that the risk factor of an unsecured loan sharing equally with a secured debt will completely unravel this whole pricing principle of secured debt. And the fact that your secured debt has a lower rating, lower pricing, and an unsecured debt has a higher pricing in terms of interest will be obliterated, and that's going to cause untold harm to the banking sector and will create the reluctance in the banks to actually get into schemes or get into plans where they would want their rights specified and a right to resile from the consent that they have given if they do not get a approval of the NCLT or the NCLAT. So it introduces an additional risk factor which is completely contrary to the intent of the IBC. So this is backward looking. We will become an island among all the countries which have bankruptcy laws. And this kind of variance between Indian interpretation of the law, it's not the law, it's an interpretation of the law, and what's happening elsewhere will actually regress India into an untouchable state.
Well, that's what the lawyers are telling us. We want to know what the bankers have made of this judgment. We have to take a quick break. We are back with comments from Mr. Kannan and Sunil Srivastava as well, where we are discussing the implications of the NCLAT judgment in the Essar Steel case, which effectively seems to reduce the powers of the financial creditor and especially the secured financial creditor. We got the comments from the lawyers. Let me now go to the bankers. Mr. Kannan, as a banker, how are you reading the implications of the NCLAT judgment in the Essar Steel case?
As Bahram actually mentioned, if there's not going to be any distinction between secured creditors and unsecured creditors, technically all of them become unsecured. So there's no need for me to go and do any perfection of security. If you remember, the 12th February circular which was struck down and the subsequent circular of RBI always insists on perfection of security to be done to ensure that the loan is given against security which has been created. If the entire purposes of the security is going to be completely removed, There's no need for all these activities. And since all of us are going to be in the same boat, you'll probably have everyone giving loans at 16%, 17%, 18%, and so on. In fact, I'm a bit surprised that Bahram is quoting as low as 15. It could be even much higher than that.
Okay.
And that is something which cannot happen. The secured and unsecured creditors were actually distinguished only to ensure that they don't go and enforce the security during the period of the resolution being prepared by the NCLAT. Nowhere does it say that they're going to have a same treatment. It is going to be a nightmare, and I think all the people should come together to try to find out that there is a clear distinction between secured and unsecured creditors. Otherwise, it will cause mayhem.
Well, as Mr. Shroff has been saying, perhaps the distinction getting obliterated is a strong way of putting it, but the IBC gave rights to the Committee of Creditors, and now that right appears to be getting diluted by the NCLAT judgment, and the tribunal gets more rights than the COC. Sunil Srivastava, would you want to come in on that? Is it just the current resolution processes that have started that are under threat, or do you think that this is going to create problems for even future commercial transactions that banks will enter into, loans that they will sanction?
See, perhaps we should go back to the genesis of why the NCLT was first set up, because providing a legal framework to the creditors to have a more expeditious realization of the stressed asset.
Yes.
And therefore, the entire construct was empowering the COC to come to a resolution or a realization process under a legal framework.
Yes.
Now, the argument here given is that the Committee of Creditors has created a subcommittee, but the subcommittee only recommends, only the COC which votes.
Yes.
So that argument really will not hold. The fact of the matter is risk pricing alignment. When you start not distinguishing between secured and unsecured, financial and operational, first charge and second charge, then why should anybody take a... why should there be a differentiation? Because if you are doing a secured asset, obviously you are pricing it lower than unsecured asset is getting its pricing to its higher, returns to its higher pricing.
Yes.
And most of the operational creditors, if you look at it, you should not expect a running concern to have more than 2 to 3 months of operational credit.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are actually, if you look at the related party, in a case in point which we are seeing on your CNBC more often than not is the Indigo Airlines. There are a whole lot of related party operational creditors. And then if you say, okay, the operational creditors on the same terms, the financial creditors and the personal guarantees of the same.
Yes. Cannot be enforced.
So cannot be enforced. So, I think it needs to go beyond just legalese. The fact of the matter is the law has really steered clear of commercial matters. And left it to the commercial judgment of people who are involved and specialists in that.
Yes.
Now, getting into that path, I'm sure the judges have their own reason, but the reason may be on grounds of being fair.
Equity, yes.
And fair, so fair is again, as Bahram mentioned earlier, in liquidation, the operational creditors are ensured at least the liquidation value.
Yes.
Now, that is the base level that they should get. But if you are getting more than what you have actually, then of course the waterfall arrangement comes into play.
Yes.
But otherwise, to equate everybody across the board, then why have the CERSAI or why have the ROC or why have the
I know.
With information utility.
Yeah, I guess a judgment made by, a decision taken by Parliament now is getting changed by the NCLAT, by the judicial wing, and more importantly, what under the law was supposedly left entirely to the Committee of Creditors is now getting diluted, questioned, and it looks like the NCLAT will make the judgment of the resolution plan and not so much the Committee of Creditors. Shardul, Shroff, I want to come back to you on this. You said it is not quite obliterating the difference. It is, the judgment is only taking away the rights of the Committee of Creditors, whereas everybody else is understanding it as completely reducing the rights of the secured creditor. Can you just give us the difference? Is it that only the Committee of Creditors' rights have been diluted, or is it something more than that? By implication, the operational creditors and unsecured creditors are getting a very big voice.
It is actually a far more serious problem, because the statute also recognizes that the resolution plan, as long as it is in conformity with the law or the prescriptions given by the IBBI as the board, then the choice or the option to the NCLT or the NCLAT does not exist. Now, what has happened is, by virtue of the introduction of regulations 36 capital A and 36B, under the regulations, the IBBI has actually prescribed rules and regulations and mandatory requirements of the resolution plan. It specifically provides that the effect of a resolution plan in downscaling or reducing the debt and the modification of the charge is an ingredient of a resolution plan. Now, when a COC really contemplates the pattern in which the security interest will get modified, the NCLAT has taken upon itself that doesn't matter. The evaluation matrix doesn't matter. The manner in which you have invited expressions of interest doesn't matter. You have to comply with a fairness doctrine equating unequals. So this whole concept which they have evolved, that it is irrespective of section 53, I can decide in my judgment, irrespective of the invitation given to parties to come, irrespective of the contents of the resolution applicant's decision on how he wants to do it so as to be a winner, because it's an evaluated matrix. You have decided upon principles of how you will select people as winners. That selection is based on the same charges and the same principles as exist. It's only a mere reduction, or it could be a release of the charge. Now, what the judge is doing is basically saying, ignore all that. I don't care what your principles of evaluation were. I don't care what your resolution plan was based on. I don't care about the consent that you gave as a resolution applicant. I don't care about the consent of the COC. I am sitting in judgment of all of you, which he is not supposed to, or which the judges are not supposed to, and I will decide whether the scheme is fair. The provisions of section 30 and 31 do not test any scheme on the basis of what the judge considered as fair. It is what is commercially considered as fair which has to be approved. Just take the case of a GLF. In the GLF, it was the secured creditors and financial creditors who took a view, purely without the imprimatur of any authority. What, as Mr. Srivastava mentioned, all that has happened is that one more judicial layer has been added for showing that this is proper and valid. In the JLR scheme, JLS scheme, what was being done was a MRA was being signed, a master resolution agreement, which was modifying all this. So if you had got the consensual framework outside of the IBC, where did this concept of I can change any scheme come? It was not even there in the Companies Act. It does not exist in processes of compromise and arrangement. Can you, in a scheme of arrangement, say, I ignore every difference between secured and unsecured creditors? I will give whatever is my decision. I mean, it's an absurdity in the law.
Okay. So, chances are that the Supreme Court or the higher court is going to take cognizance of what all other laws are saying and what has been commercial practice so far. But, Bahram, do you think amendments are required to the IBC law? Or do you think that the Superior Court will perhaps set right what looks like excessive judicial activism in this specific case?
No, I think, Latha, I'm glad you asked. It's a very good question. In the normal course, maybe, but this is of so much significance, I truly believe it is, that I would not take the chances. If I could preempt and make the amendment which makes it free from any doubt, I would do it, because also in fairness to the Supreme Court, they've been giving so much priority that they've got a lot of time pressure. So that's my view, because it's too important. As Shardul put, I'm very glad he highlighted that in all our road shows, the single biggest issue was the issue we've all discussed. And it's a crying shame that the largest players, foreign players in our market, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, etc., so many of them, said that today Their words were, we are the #1 country for distressed investment. #1, barring none. And by doing this, when we have a golden opportunity, when we want the capital so much, why would we do this? I mean, they're now saying we lose our jobs. Let's pack up and go and find another place. We took too much of a chance on India.
Okay. So you would want, therefore, the government to step in with an amendment?
I think so. I think so. This is like, it's really, really crucial.
Okay. All right. Well, just wrapping up comments. Mr. Kannan, what do you think will be the upshot? You think the banks are going to prevail upon the government? Would that be one way out?
As I think Shardul also mentioned, I think we have to make efforts from all directions to see that this is set right. Otherwise, not only this particular case, you're going to have even some of the other cases which is almost near resolution, where people are going to say, in the light of this judgment, please revisit. I understand that it's already happened in a couple of other cases, where the NCLT has said, in the light of this new NCLAT decision, please revisit it. And this is going to cause a lot of problems. And like Bahram was mentioning, the COC has been given the right to decide on the resolution plan, subject to the fact that the operational creditors can get a minimum of the liquidation value. I think then that should be more or less upheld, and that is something which we are finding that the judicial people are taking a call on a commercial judgment which has been empowered under the IBC code. I think it's essential that we take up the matter. I think many of them are seized of the matter. Let's see how it progresses, but I'm quite confident that there will be positive steps to ensure that the FPI's interest in the Indian market continues.
Yes.
And that is something which we cannot afford to lose.
Yes. No, more than the FPI interest, which will come in the fullness of time, the reason why we passed the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was to remove the infirmities in the SARFACI and the DRT processes, to try and make the process a bit, well, I won't say judge-proof, that may be strong, but to ensure that the legal process doesn't delay the resolution of assets to a point where it becomes totally uneconomic. The opportunity cost of money is completely killed. That is what the IBC was trying to stop and give a time-bound framework and more powers to the commercial judgment of bankers, which perhaps is getting completely diluted by this judgment. A last question to you, Shardul, Shroff, what is the next step? Now the case will just be going to the Supreme Court, and what kind of a date, timeline are you looking at?
I think two things which I'd like to mention, Latha. Today's papers clearly indicate that the government is ready to amend the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, both for personal insolvencies and for cross-border insolvency. My strongest suggestion, and I totally agree with Bahram, is that there must be an amendment to the code which expressly clarifies the rights of the secured creditor and the inability of the tribunals to effectively unsettle the commercial decisions of the COC, and that their right is limited. Section 30 and 31 must be clarified so that there should be no confusion that the commercial decisions of the applicant and as accepted by the COC should be final unless it is absurdly contrary to law. So this kind of decision and amendment must follow. The second suggestion that I have is that this matter distorts the very principles which IBBI is bound to support, because all these are amendments which have been reflected in the regulations from 2018. The IBBI has introduced a procedure which is law, and that procedure is being flouted by judicial interpretation. So the IBBI also must intervene in the Supreme Court to say that this is wrong. And thirdly, of course, the Committee of Creditors will appeal, and that appeal should be imminent, may happen in the next 2-3 days. This matter will just get admitted in maybe 10-15 days.
Sure.
But the final hearing, the setting down of the case it'll take 3 months.
Okay. All right.
That is why I agree with Bahram that a legislative solution is very critical.
Sunil Srivastava, a final word from you. Do you think this only is a legal solution, or are you, as a banker, are you learning any other lessons from this?
Yeah, I think considerable time has been lost. Let us not lose our considerable rights, otherwise it will only lead to liquidation.
Shardul, Shroff, Bahram, Vakil, Srinivastava and VG Kannan, thank you very much for joining me in this discussion. The key takeaways, one hopes the Parliament quickly amends the IBC to ensure that the commercial judgment of the Committee of Creditors is respected and the process is safeguarded. Alternatively, one hopes the Supreme Court does the same thing when the case comes up for hearing, maybe 3 months down the line. In any case, a good lot of money, time and money has been destroyed. One hopes the IBC process is respected by all parties. Thank you very much for watching this special edition of Indianomics.